Why was she still moving when every other rescue team had already turned back? The storm screamed across the Hindu Kush like a living thing, tearing at her hood, clawing at her skin through layers of insulated fabric. The thermometer on her wrist had plunged to 30 below and dropping. Most radios had gone dead the night before. Helicopters had been grounded. Command had written off the patrol as unrecoverable until weather clears. But Morgan Hayes kept walking. She heard it again, faint, so faint she thought it might be the wind bending into words. A voice, human, pleading, then gone. She stopped, rifle resting across her knees, the weight of the M24 steadying her hands. She closed her eyes, forcing her pulse down. Breathe. Listen. The mountain was never silent. Snow shifted, rocks cracked under ice, wind howled through unseen cuts in the ridge. But beneath all that, yes, there it was again, a call for help. Her lips parted. "I'm coming," she whispered, though no one could hear. Most people would have called it impossible, finding 6 missing soldiers in the teeth of an Afghan winter storm with nothing but a compass, a pack, and her own instincts. But Morgan wasn't most people. At 21, she was small by military standards, barely 5'3", carrying more weight on her back than her own frame seemed built for. The men at the base had dismissed her with polite smiles. A rookie, an experiment, a girl with no business being out here. Yet here she was, the only one still pushing forward. Her gloved hand brushed the old compass clipped to her harness. Brass worn smooth from decades of use, it had belonged to her father, William Hayes. He had carried it through jungles, deserts, mountains, through a life he spoke of rarely and never in detail. A soldier once, a ghost later, then a father teaching his daughter lessons other children would never learn. The compass needle wavered, shivering against invisible distortions in the storm, magnetic anomalies. She had been warned they made navigation unreliable here. Still, she kept it close, not because she trusted the instrument, but because she trusted him. Her boots crunched through snow, hiding death, crevasses, sheer drops, sudden slides. Most soldiers feared these mountains because they couldn't read them. Morgan moved like she had been born here, because, in a way, she had. Dead Horse, Alaska, a memory as sharp as the wind on her face. She was 10 years old, kneeling beside a caribou her father had just felled. She remembered the steam rising from its hide, the way his knife slid cleanly along natural seams in the flesh. "See," William said, his breath misting. "The animal tells you where to cut if you pay attention." Morgan mimicked his motions in the air with her small hands, eyes fixed on every detail. "Can I try?" she asked. He hesitated, then he placed the knife in her palm, his hand dwarfed hers. "No wasted cuts," he said. "Respect what it gave us." The blade felt heavy, important. She pressed it into the hide, following exactly where he had shown her. Not too fast, not too shallow, slow, deliberate. Her father's eyes, ice blue like hers, nodded approval. "Good. You rush out here, you die, take your time. The wilderness always gives you what you need, but never twice." That night, as she lay awake in their cabin, she heard his voice through the shortwave radio, speaking to someone he only called Colonel. He never used that tone with her or her mother. Rigid, formal. "Yes, sir, she's showing real potential, instincts I haven't seen before, even at this age." She had held her breath, straining to hear. A program, parameters, words too large for her to understand but heavy enough to make her chest tighten. And her father's voice, defensive, like he was arguing for her, not against her. She didn't know then that her life was already marked, that somewhere far away, in Washington, D.C., a file with her name had begun to thicken. But at 10, all she knew was that her father carried scars he never spoke of, that sometimes, after nights on the radio, he stared at the mountains like they were holding secrets he could never share. Now, 11 years later, she was walking through mountains that felt eerily the same. Different continent, same silence, same deadly rules. The voice came again, closer this time, cracking through the storm like a wire pulled tight. Morgan adjusted her rifle strap and pushed toward the sound. She thought of her father's words, "Technology changes, the wilderness doesn't." She thought of how he had drowned in ice water when she was 14, leaving her to build a shelter alone, waiting for a father who never came back. She had survived 4 days through a blizzard with nothing but a compass, a knife, and his voice in her memory. The rescuers had called it a miracle. The colonel had called it proof. Her father's funeral had been small, snow falling over his grave. She hadn't cried, not then. She remembered staring at the fresh mound of earth, hearing the colonel's voice beside her. "You don't just observe nature, Morgan. You communicate with it. That's rare. That's valuable." She had wanted to scream at him. She hadn't asked for that gift. She hadn't asked for any of it. But grief has a way of binding you to the last words you hear. The storm pressed harder, forcing her to lean forward. Every step burned through precious energy. Her lips were cracked, her lungs raw, but inside her chest the same fire burned. She would not turn back. Because there was something no one at the base knew, something she hadn't told them yet. These mountains had already taken from her once. They had claimed her father's brothers-in-arms back in 1986 when his Special Forces team disappeared in a storm not unlike this one. 4 men gone in a single night, not to bullets, not to an ambush, to the mountain itself. The storm had killed their radios, frozen their GPS, blinded them into wandering. They had been soldiers of the future, undone by something ancient. Her father had survived, but he never forgave himself. He told her once in a rare crack of honesty, "We had all the gear, all the technology. It didn't matter. The mountain taught us who was in charge." Now she was here, walking through the same range, chasing voices of soldiers gone silent in almost the same way. History has a way of circling back, sometimes across decades, sometimes across bloodlines. Morgan gripped the compass tighter. Somewhere out there, 6 soldiers were waiting. Somewhere, the mountain had swallowed them whole, and she was the only one left who might drag them back. Her boots slid on a crust of ice, nearly sending her over a hidden drop. She caught herself, heart pounding. One mistake. That's all it would take. A single slip and she'd vanish like the rest. But she kept moving, because she knew one truth, one her father had drilled into her with every lesson, every scar, every story half told. Survival wasn't about fighting the wilderness. It was about becoming part of it. And tonight, if she was going to save them, she'd have to disappear into the storm until the mountain itself couldn't tell her apart from its own shadow. What choice does a 14-year-old make when the man who taught her everything vanishes under the ice? The memory struck with the same force as the wind pounding her face now. Alaska, February. The sky had turned black in the middle of the day, a storm swallowing the world whole. She remembered the sound of ice cracking like gunfire, the scream tearing from her throat as her father disappeared through a frozen lake. "Stay back," he had shouted, arms thrashing in the freezing water. "The ice won't hold." She hadn't listened. She had dropped to her belly, crawling toward him with the rope from her pack. His eyes had locked on hers, blue against the snow, desperate and commanding. "Morgan, listen. You need to get to the pines, build shelter, I'll follow." "I'm not leaving you." "That's an order." It wasn't the voice of her father then. It was the soldier, sharp and absolute, and for the first time she obeyed. She had turned back, the storm swallowing him behind her. She had dug into the snow beneath split pines, knife in hand, cutting blocks for a shelter. She had built fire with numb fingers, sparks catching against waterproof tinder. Hours passed, then night, then another day. And he never came. By the 3rd morning, she had understood what her mind had been fighting to accept. Her father was gone. She had a 15-mile journey ahead, through a blizzard fierce enough to bury grown men in their tracks, and she was only 14. She remembered skinning a snowshoe hare with shaking hands, hearing his voice in her head. "The animal tells you where to cut if you pay attention." She remembered the feel of her compass, his compass, in her pocket as though it pulsed with its own warmth. She remembered walking through the storm, step by step, telling herself she would not die. When the search team found her 4 days later, they called her a miracle. But Morgan knew better. It wasn't a miracle. It was training. It was blood. It was a father who had been preparing her all along. They found his body days later, curled against a tree. His frozen hand clutched the compass, as if he had meant to pass it on. At the funeral, snow fell soft and silent. She remembered staring at the earth that covered him, feeling nothing. No tears, no screams, just a hollow silence that made the world look different. She remembered the colonel standing beside her, a stranger with sharp eyes that seemed to see too much. "Your father was one of the finest men I ever served with," he said. She hadn't answered. "What you did out there, alone in that storm, was extraordinary. Not everything can be taught. Some things are instinct. You have them." She had wanted to tell him to go away, to leave her and her mother in peace. Instead, he slipped a card into her hand, just a name and a number. "When you're older," he said, "if you're interested in a certain path, call me." She didn't know then that her life had just shifted, that the card in her hand was a key she hadn't asked for. Years passed, the world changed. Dead Horse, Alaska, a place built on oil, ice, and stubbornness, collapsed. Her mother moved them to Anchorage, where the wilderness shrank to distant mountains and the walls of their rented house felt like a cage. Morgan tried jobs, tried school, tried to live like other 19-year-olds. None of it fit. Her hands twitched for a rifle. Her eyes kept drifting to the horizon. Then the call came. A storage unit in Dead Horse. Her father's things would be auctioned if the bill wasn't paid. $800 might as well have been $8 million. Her mother stared at the table, broken in ways Morgan couldn't fix. That night, Morgan opened the compass case. The card was still inside, edges worn from years of being carried, hidden, remembered. She stared at the number, hatting herself for what she was about to do. Then she dialed. "Morrison," the voice said on the other end. She swallowed. "This is Morgan Hayes, William Hayes' daughter." Silence. Then, "I remember, you're calling earlier than I expected." Earlier, the word sat heavy, but she pushed it aside. She told him about the bill, about the auction, about her father's tools, journals, gear, all about to be sold off. "I'll take care of it," Morrison said, "but I want to meet you." The next week, she sat across from him in a small Anchorage cafe. He was older now, hair white, a cane leaning against the chair, but his eyes hadn't lost their sharpness. "Your father believed in you," he said, "and so do I." Morgan frowned. "Believe in me for what?" He leaned closer. "Have you ever heard of Project Wayfinder?" The name meant nothing. He explained anyway. How the military had learned painfully that technology could fail. That in 1986, his own men had died because they couldn't survive without GPS, without radios, without machines. That her father had survived because he carried knowledge older than satellites. "We created a program," Morrison said, "to find people like him, people like you, people who don't just survive in the wilderness, they become part of it." Morgan stared at him. "You're saying my father was preparing me for this?" Whether he admitted it or not, yes. Morrison slid a folder across the table. Inside were papers, an application, training outlines, a contract that looked more like a secret than a job offer. "This isn't enlistment," he said. "It's selection, a different path if you want it." She stared at the folder, the card burning in her pocket. Her mind screamed no, but her body remembered the storm, the snow, the fire she had built alone, her father's voice whispering in her ear even after he was gone. She closed the folder. "I need time." 3 months, Morrison said. "That's when the next course begins. After that, the door closes." She carried the folder home, tucked it under her mattress. She told no one. Not her mother, who was drowning in grief and wine. Not the few friends she had left who would never understand. At night, she opened it. She read about survival tests in deserts, jungles, mountains, about navigation without instruments, about evasion under surveillance, about becoming the kind of soldier who could vanish into terrain while others froze, starved, or died. Her father's voice came back again. Technology changes, the wilderness doesn't. And for the first time since his death, she felt something like a path beneath her feet. 3 months later, Morgan Hayes stepped through the gates of Fort Bragg, North Carolina. She was 21, small, unknown, alone. 16 recruits stood in line, most older, taller, louder. Veterans of special forces, survival instructors, trackers with years of experience. And in the middle of them, her. The man packing in front of them was built like stone, Master Sergeant Harker. He looked at her file, then at her. No college, no service record, no experience. Why are you here? Morgan kept her eyes forward. Colonel Morrison approved my application, sir. The way he said the colonel's name was almost a curse. Special cases, Harker muttered. Special cases get people killed. The recruits laughed under their breath. Morgan didn't move, didn't flinch. She had been underestimated before. She would be again. It didn't matter. Because there was something she hadn't told them, something none of them would see until it was too late. She wasn't here to prove herself to them. She was here to finish what her father started. What happens when you throw a girl from the Alaskan wilderness into the heart of military order? Morgan stood in the mud with 15 others, sweat soaking through her uniform, lungs burning from the endless morning run. The cadence calls echoed across the training field. She stayed silent. She never liked shouting. It wasted breath. Hayes, Master Sergeant Harker's voice cut through the air like a whip. He stalked toward her, barrel-chested, eyes sharp with disdain. You think you're too good to join in, too fragile to sound off with the rest of them. No, Sergeant, she said evenly. Then why aren't you shouting? She met his gaze, unblinking. I'm conserving energy. Laughter rippled through the line. Harker's face turned to stone. Conserving energy, he stepped close, towering over her. This is Alaska, Hayes. This is the United States Army. You follow orders or you fail. She didn't answer, didn't break eye contact. The silence stretched until he barked, drop. She hit the ground, palms sinking into mud, body dropping into push-ups until her arms trembled. Around her, boots stomped past. She kept going, face set, breathing steady, every push a reminder. She wasn't here to impress him. She was here because Morrison believed she belonged, because her father's voice lived in her head, whispering, slow, steady. The wilderness doesn't care how loud you shout. Training was relentless. Mornings began with punishing runs and drills, afternoons with navigation, survival, and tactical exercises, evenings with planning sessions that stretched until midnight. Most of the recruits were seasoned, rangers, special forces candidates, wilderness guides with years of field work. Morgan, she was the youngest, the smallest, the one with no record, no medals, no history but snow and silence. That made her invisible, and invisibility was a weapon. She learned fast where her weaknesses lay. Formation drills left her struggling to keep up with taller, stronger recruits. Weapons disassembly, she fumbled under Harker's glare. Team tactics, she moved awkwardly within rigid formations designed for people who trusted electronics. But then came the field exercises. One night they were dropped in the woods with tampered compasses. Clouds covered the stars. Teams panicked. Directions blurred. Men cursed in the dark. Morgan pressed her palm against tree bark, feeling for moss, subtle growth patterns invisible to the others. She tilted her face upward, reading the faintest light shift where the clouds thinned. Follow me, she told her team. Hours later, while others wandered, Morgan led hers to the extraction point. Harker's eyes burned holes through her when she arrived. He didn't praise her. He didn't need to. The others already knew. Another exercise, winter survival. Issued gear only, no extras. Most recruits fought with frozen matches, cursed at damp tinder, stomped in frustration as their fires smoked out. Morgan cut a snow trench, lined it with spruce boughs, struck a spark from a stone into tinder she had dried inside her clothes. Within minutes, a flame danced. She built a shelter that trapped heat, snow walls reflecting the fire's warmth back inside. By dawn, she was rested. The others shivered, blue-lipped, eyes hollow. Captain Rodriguez, the medical officer, watched quietly, arms crossed. Later, she pulled Morgan aside. "Where'd you learn that?" "My father taught me," Morgan said simply. Rodriguez nodded slowly. "He was right, you have it." But not everyone was convinced. Harker smelled weakness like a wolf. Every time she succeeded, he raised the bar higher. Every time she adapted, he tried to break her with rules. "You can't lead a team if you don't follow orders," he told her one night. She stared back at him. "You can't lead a team if you let rules kill them." That earned her extra miles the next morning. Her inner conflict grew. She knew she was right. Her instincts had saved her team more than once. But she also knew the army didn't care about instinct. It cared about obedience. Could she survive in a system built on orders when her entire life had taught her to rely on silence and independence? The breaking point came in week 4, the evasion exercise. "Hayes, you're leading," Harker announced, smugness in his tone. 24 hours. Instructor team hunting you with drones, dogs, and thermal. Last longer than 12 and I'll be impressed. Her team groaned. The challenge was designed for failure. That night, while others whispered plans about splitting up or running fast, Morgan studied the map. She saw streams, ridgelines, clay banks. She saw the way the storm front was moving. She didn't plan like a soldier. She planned like a hunter. At dawn, she led them into the stream itself, water numbing their legs. Dogs lost their scent. At a bend, she smeared their skin with clay, drying it into a second hide. She led them into a bramble thicket where thermal scans saw nothing but a tangled heat mass. By night, she had them shadowing deer through the forest, moving when the animals moved, stopping when they stopped. By dawn, for the first time in program history, a team had evaded capture for 24 hours. When they emerged, caked in mud and exhaustion, Harker was waiting. His face was thunder. "Congratulations," he said like it was a curse. Rodriguez smiled openly. "That was brilliant, Hayes." Morgan only shrugged. "It's just what works in the wild." But inside, her chest burned with something she hadn't felt in years. Pride. Not because she had beaten the system, but because for once she hadn't been ignored. That night, lying in her bunk, she thought of her father, of the way he had whispered that knowledge lasts longer than technology, of the way he had died proving it. She closed her eyes and let herself feel it. The quiet satisfaction of knowing she was walking a path he had seen long before she had. But she also felt the weight of Harker's stare, the hatred in his eyes, the warning that this was far from over. And she was right, because the next test would not just measure her survival skills, it would measure her heart. What do you do when the rules say walk away, but your instincts scream stay? Morgan stood on the mountain trail, snow crunching under her boots, breath fogging in the cold. The exercise had been simple on paper. Pairs of recruits, each tasked with locating a downed pilot, a training dummy, using GPS coordinates and radio comms. 6 hours to succeed. Failure meant elimination. Her partner, Specialist Thomas, was built like a machine. Tall, broad, confident in every button and device strapped to his chest. He grinned as he tapped the GPS unit in his hand. "We'll be first back, Hayes. Don't even need to break a sweat." She said nothing, just adjusted her pack and followed. For 2 hours the plan worked. The screen guided them up ridges and through narrow cuts in the forest. Thomas marched with confidence, calling out bearings like a commander. Morgan let him lead, storing the terrain in her mind, the slope of ridges, the angle of the sun, the cut of wind through the trees. Then, without warning, everything died. The GPS flickered, froze, and went dark. Their radio cut to static. Even the emergency beacons blinked once and went black. Thomas stopped in his tracks. What the hell? EMP simulation, Morgan said quietly. Electronics gone. Thomas cursed, shaking the device. We have to abort, that's protocol. Without comms, without coordinates, the mission's compromised. Morgan scanned the horizon. We don't need them, I know where we are, we can still make it. He laughed harshly. Impossible. You expect me to believe you can navigate to a pinpoint location in this wilderness without tools. That's fantasy. She turned her pale eyes steady. Trust me. He hesitated, then reluctantly he followed. She led them down into the valley, not by compass but by signs no one else noticed. The lean of snow against trunks, the angle of shadow, the shift in bird patterns overhead. Hours later, they crested a ridge. Below them, in a hollow, the training dummy lay half buried in snow. Thomas' jaw dropped. Hell. But Morgan wasn't listening. She had spotted something else. Another team in the distance, wandering the wrong direction. They were exhausted, gear heavy, moving away from the objective. They'll freeze out here, she murmured. Not our problem, Thomas snapped. Rules say no contact. They'll be lost for hours. The storm's dropping temperature fast. That's the test, Hayes. Let them fail. She hesitated. The rules were clear, but she saw the way the other team stumbled, their pace uneven. She heard her father's voice. Survival isn't about rules, it's about choices. Without another word, she descended the slope. She intercepted the wandering team, told them they were off course, pointed them toward the right valley. Their leader stared at her, stunned. Why are you helping us? Because out there, she said, jerking her chin at the mountains, the storm doesn't care about rules. When she returned to Thomas, his face was red with fury. You just got us both kicked. She didn't answer. She simply shouldered her rifle and headed toward the dummy. They were the first team to succeed. Back at base, the victory didn't matter. Harker was waiting. His voice was ice. Hayes, you violated exercise parameters. You deliberately assisted another team. That's grounds for dismissal. Thomas smirked. Told you. Before Morgan could speak, Captain Rodriguez stepped forward. With respect, Sergeant, she prevented a safety hazard. That team was 3 miles off with dropping temperatures. She made a call that saved them from hypothermia. This was training, Captain, Harker roared. Real-world risks don't apply here. Rodriguez's eyes flashed. With real weather conditions, with real lives at stake, Hayes made a judgment call, the right one. The argument escalated until Colonel Morrison himself was pulled in via secure video call. His face filled the screen, older now, voice gravel but steady. He listened as Harker pressed for dismissal. Rodriguez defended, Thomas sneered. Finally, Morrison spoke. The purpose of this program is not to build soldiers who follow checklists. It is to create operatives who can make critical decisions in environments where rules mean nothing. Hayes identified risk, acted to mitigate it, and still completed her mission. That is exactly what this program is for. Harker's face flushed, but he couldn't contradict him. Yes, sir, he bit out. The screen went dark. Silence hung over the room. Morgan stood still, eyes lowered. Not triumphant, not smug, just steady. That night, Rodriguez found her outside, sitting alone on a log, staring up at the stars. You know, Rodriguez said softly, most people here would have played it safe, followed rules, watched others fail. No one would have blamed you. Morgan didn't look away from the sky. I'm not here to pass tests. I'm here to survive, and to make sure others do too. Rodriguez studied her. That's rare and dangerous. People like Harker, they don't forgive unorthodox. I don't need his forgiveness. You will, because one day he won't be the one trying to break you. The world will. Morgan didn't answer. The night wind whispered through the pines, carrying the same chill she had felt years ago in Alaska. The same weight. She wondered if her father had felt this too. That strange loneliness of knowing you were trained for something others couldn't even see. The weeks that followed were worse. Harker doubled down, designing scenarios meant to expose her weaknesses. He forced her into team formations, overloaded her with gear, set rules so strict they strangled her instincts. But Morgan adapted. She always adapted. When the team was ordered to build a shelter with issued gear only, she used snow blocks and pine boughs to create insulation that outperformed regulation tents. When ordered to navigate to a waypoint without crossing open ground, she studied terrain until she found a path invisible on maps. When ordered to evade drones in daylight, she coated herself in mud, blending into shadow until the sensors passed overhead. Every time Harker seethed, every time Rodriguez smiled faintly. By the end of 16 weeks, the statistics spoke for themselves. Morgan Hayes, youngest recruit, least experienced, smallest in stature, scored the highest fieldcraft results in program history, and the most citations for noncompliance. At graduation, Morrison appeared in person, cane in hand. His voice carried across the small group. "You are the last of a dying breed. In an age of technology, you are the reminder that knowledge, true knowledge, outlives machines. Remember that. Out there, technology will fail you. Your instincts will not." Later, privately, he pressed an envelope into Morgan's hand. "Orders," he said. She unfolded the papers. "Afghanistan, Forward Operating Base Granite, the Hindu Kush." Her stomach tightened. "Where my father lost his team." Morrison's gaze was steady. "History circles back, Hayes, sometimes across generations. 6 soldiers have already gone missing in those mountains this month. Conventional units failed. I'm sending you." Her fingers closed around the compass in her pocket, the same one her father had carried, the same one he had died holding. "I won't fail," she said. His eyes softened. "Your father said the same thing before his last mission. Make sure your outcome is different." Why send her here if no one would even listen? Morgan stepped off the transport at Forward Operating Base Granite, the dust of Afghanistan rising in a haze around her boots. The Hindu Kush towered in the distance, jagged and merciless, the same range her father had cursed decades earlier. She adjusted her pack, rifle slung over her shoulder, compass heavy in her pocket. The base buzzed with tension, soldiers moving fast, radios crackling, the smell of diesel and sweat hanging thick in the air. Helicopters idled on the pad, their rotors cutting the dry wind. She reported to the command tent, papers in hand. Inside, a cluster of officers bent over maps. A captain looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "Yes, who are you?" "Special assignment, Morgan Hayes," she said. "Colonel Morrison's orders." The captain scanned her papers, then her face. His expression didn't soften. "You're the replacement. For what morale?" The others chuckled. Morgan stood still. "I'm here to locate the missing patrol." "Patrol's gone," another officer said flatly. "Lost contact 5 days ago. Severe weather front. Will recover bodies when conditions clear." "They might still be alive." The captain's jaw tightened. "We've had 3 search teams fail, helicopters grounded. Locals won't guide in this weather. We're not wasting more lives on a dead patrol." Her voice was steady. "Then let me go alone." The tent went silent. Then the laughter came again, louder this time. "You, alone? What are you, some kind of wilderness fairy?" Morgan said nothing. She let the silence stretch until the captain shoved the papers back at her. "Stay on base. That's an order, dismissed." She walked out without a word, but inside the fire built. Orders, always orders. That night she sat on the edge of her cot, studying the compass. The needle quivered, never steady in this land, distorted by something beneath the mountains. She turned it slowly in her hand, remembering her father's voice. The wilderness doesn't care about orders. She lay back, staring at the canvas ceiling. Around her, laughter from other soldiers, jokes, music from a tinny speaker. Life going on as if 6 men weren't out there somewhere, cold, hungry, dying by inches. She closed her eyes. She saw their faces though she had never met them. She heard her father's team, lost in '86, swallowed by storm. She felt the echo of that guilt, passed down like a curse. Sleep came in fragments, dreams of whiteout storms, of voices calling through snow. She woke before dawn, heart pounding, sweat damp on her skin. She made her choice. By the time the base stirred awake, she was already outside the wire. Pack heavy, rifle secure, compass in her palm. No fanfare, no permission, just silence. The mountains loomed ahead, dark shapes against the rising sun. The wind carried whispers through the valleys, cold as knives. She walked. The first hours were steady. She followed dry creek beds, cut across ridges, drank sparingly from her canteen. The land here was harsh, a mix of stone and ice, cliffs that rose like walls. Every step echoed her childhood, every shadow a reminder that she was alone. By midday, she found the first sign. A torn strap, olive drab, frayed at the edges, half buried in snow. She crouched, lifted it gently, a pack strap, standard issue, recent. Her pulse quickened. She searched the area. Boot prints, faint but visible where the snow hadn't drifted. Too many for just one soldier. 6, maybe more, heading upward toward the ridge. She closed her eyes, inhaling. Even the air carried memory. Men had moved here, struggled here. The storm had nearly erased them, but not completely. Her instinct stirred, follow them. She pushed upward, the slope biting at her calves. The air thinned, colder, sharper. Twice she slipped, catching herself before she slid into ravines. At dusk, she found the second sign. A ration pack torn open, its contents scattered. She knelt beside it, fingers brushing the frozen wrapper. Not animals, too clean. Someone had ripped it in desperation. Her throat tightened. They had been here, alive, days ago. The storm clouds gathered fast, night pressing down. She built a shelter beneath a ledge, cutting blocks of snow, stacking them with deliberate care. A small fire sparked to life, warmth pushing back the cold. She ate sparingly, dried meat, hard biscuits, then leaned back, compass in her palm. The needle spun faintly, unstable. The mountains here bent the earth's pull, playing tricks on navigation. But she didn't need it. She knew where to go. As the fire crackled, she thought of the base, of the captain dismissing her, of Harker's voice back at Fort Bragg, sneering about rules, of Rodriguez telling her that unorthodox was dangerous. She thought of her father. The wilderness doesn't give you two chances. Her chest tightened. She whispered into the fire, I won't let them vanish, not like you. Sleep was shallow. Wind rattled the rocks, snow sifted into cracks. She dreamed again of voices, faint, pleading, carried on the storm. She woke with a start, heart racing. She wasn't imagining them. Somewhere out there in the frozen black of the mountains, 6 men were still alive, and she was the only one listening. She rose before dawn, packed her gear, stamped out the fire. She stood at the edge of the ledge, the valley yawning below, mountains rising into mist. Alone, unordered, unwanted. And yet, exactly where she was meant to be. How long can a body last when the mountain itself wants it gone? Morgan's legs burned as she climbed, every step into the ridge a fight against gravity and ice. The storm thickened around her, blinding, relentless. Snow whipped sideways, a white wall that erased the world beyond 10 feet. Her goggles iced over. She ripped them off, eyes stinging from the cold. The wind roared through the peaks like a voice. Sometimes it sounded like her father, sometimes like the men she hunted, sometimes like nothing human at all. She pushed on. Her compass needle spun again, useless, twitching in circles. She shoved it back in her pocket. The mountains distorted the earth's pull here, just as her father had warned. Trust the signs, he had told her once. The sky, the slope, the way snow drifts. The earth always tells you where to go if you listen. So she listened. She noticed the slope leaned harder to the east, the snow carving sharper cuts. She noticed a faint line of tracks where boots had broken the crust, nearly erased by wind. 6 men. Heavy loads, staggering, recent enough to matter. Her chest tightened, she followed. Hours passed. The cold sank deeper, clawing into her bones. She flexed her fingers, afraid they would stop moving if she didn't. She pulled her scarf higher, breath freezing against fabric. Then sound, a hollow thud low and deep. She froze, listened. The mountain groaned, the slope above shifted. Avalanche. Morgan, move, her father's voice alive in her head. She sprinted sideways, lungs tearing, boots breaking through crust. The slope exploded behind her, snow collapsing in a wave that thundered like artillery. The ground vanished under white, trees snapping, rocks rolling. She dove behind an outcrop, pressed into the stone as the avalanche roared past, shaking the world. When it settled, silence returned, eerie and absolute. She lay there, heart pounding, alive barely. Slowly she rose, snow crusting her gear, legs trembling from the run. Ahead the tracks were gone, buried, erased. She wanted to scream, to pound the snow with her fists, but she stayed quiet. Breathing hard, chest aching, she forced herself to think. If the patrol was caught in that? She shook her head. No, they were still out there, they had to be. She adjusted her pack and kept moving. By nightfall, the storm worsened. She hacked into a drift, carving a snow cave with her knife. She crawled inside, sealed the entrance, lit a candle for warmth. The small flame flickered against the walls, casting shadows that moved like ghosts. She sat with her knees pulled tight, compass in her palm, letting its cold brass warm against her skin. Her mind drifted back to Alaska, to nights in the cabin when her father would stare at the fire, eyes distant. She used to ask him what he was thinking. He never answered. Now she knew. He was thinking of this, of mountains that took more than they gave, of men who never came back. She closed her eyes. "I'm here, Dad," she whispered, "finishing what you couldn't." Sleep came, fractured and cruel. She dreamed of drowning under ice, her father's hand slipping from hers. She dreamed of soldiers, faces she had never seen, pale and hollow, calling her name. She woke gasping, the candle burned to nothing. Her body shook violently, hypothermia clawed at her. She tore open her emergency kit, lit another flame, forced hot tea into her mouth. Slowly, the shaking eased. She lived barely, again. At dawn, she forced herself back out. The storm had eased, sky opening in pale strips of blue. The world looked carved from silver, beautiful, deadly. She walked. By midday, she found it. A glove, half-frozen, blood on the cuff. Her breath caught, she crouched, lifted it gently. Inside, a name stenciled in fading ink. Lopez. Her throat tightened, one of the missing still fighting. She scanned the snow. Nearby, drag marks, deep grooves as if someone had pulled another man uphill. Alive, at least one alive. Her heart surged. She rose, following the trail. Her legs moved faster now, fire burning through exhaustion. Every step felt like a battle, but she welcomed it. Pain meant she was still here. Pain meant they were still out there. The sun slid behind the peaks, shadows long and cold. The trail led her into a narrow canyon, its walls rising steep, echoing with wind. She crouched low, every sense on edge. The drag marks ended near a cluster of rocks. She crept forward, rifle ready. And then she heard it. A cough, weak, human. Her breath caught. She froze, heart hammering. Someone was alive. What if the voice you finally find is too weak to answer back? Morgan slid between boulders, rifle raised, breath caught in her chest. The cough came again, ragged, struggling, then silence. She rounded the rocks and saw him. A man half buried in snow, back propped against stone, eyes glazed but open. His lips were cracked, skin pale, frost creeping along his beard. One glove gone, his bare hand was blue. Morgan dropped to her knees. Lopez. His gaze flicked to her, unfocused. His mouth moved, No sound came. She tore off her pack, ripped open the thermal blanket, wrapped it around his shoulders. She pressed a canteen to his lips, tilting gently. Water spilled down his chin, but he swallowed. Barely. "You're all right," she whispered, voice steady though her hands shook. "You're found, I've got you." She pulled gauze from her kit, wrapped his hand tight, working fast, precise. Her father's voice whispered in her memory, "Don't panic. Panic wastes time. Time kills." Lopez's chest rose shallow, but he was breathing, alive. She scanned the canyon, more drag marks leading deeper. She tightened her grip on the rifle, stood, and moved. She found them 20 minutes later. 5 men huddled in a shallow cave. They looked more like shadows than soldiers, faces sunken, uniforms torn, bodies shaking under thin scraps of cloth. Frostbite gnawed at their hands, their ears. 2 were unconscious. One lifted his head when she entered, eyes wide with disbelief. "Holy hell," he rasped. "Who are you?" "Morgan Hayes," she said. "I'm here to bring you back." The cave went silent. The soldiers stared as if she were a ghost. One whispered, we thought no one was coming." Morgan crouched beside the unconscious men, checking pulses, quick and practiced. Alive. Weak, but alive. Relief surged through her chest, so sharp it almost hurt. "You're coming," she said firmly. "All of you." The one still awake, Sergeant Hale, his name stitched faint on his chest, shook his head. "We can't move. 2 can't walk. Supplies gone. We'll just slow you down. If you found us, you need to get out. Tell command, come back with a bird." Morgan looked at him, steady. "There is no bird. Command grounded flights. They wrote you off 5 days ago." Hale's jaw clenched. He dropped his gaze. The others closed their eyes, despair pressing heavier than the snow outside. Morgan's voice cut through the silence. "Listen to me. You've survived this long. I didn't come out here to bury you. I'm not leaving without you." Hale's eyes lifted, searching hers. He saw something there, not rank, not orders, but something older. Instinct. Refusal. A fire he thought was long gone. He swallowed. "Then you're in charge now." The words hit her like a weight. She wanted to protest. She wasn't their officer, wasn't even supposed to be here. But the truth pressed hard. No one else was coming. Her father's voice again, quiet, relentless. "Sometimes survival means stepping into the role no one gives you." She nodded once. "All right, first we warm you, then we move." She built a fire in the cave mouth, smoke hidden by the storm outside. She rationed her supplies, melting snow for water, dividing her food into 6. Too little for all, but better than nothing. She rubbed life into frozen limbs, forced them to sip and swallow, to chew even when their jaws shook. Hours passed, color returned faintly to cheeks, breathing steadied. But night fell fast, and with it, another storm. Wind screamed through the canyon, snow blowing sideways. The cave shook with the sound, as if the mountain was warning them. Morgan sat awake, rifle across her lap, listening. Her eyes burned from exhaustion, but she didn't close them. She studied the men, fragile, broken, but alive. Doubt crept in. Could she lead them out? 6 men, 2 unable to walk, storms growing worse by the hour. The base was miles away, supplies thin, the mountain unforgiving. She stared at the fire until her vision blurred. She wanted her father's voice, his certainty, but all she had was memory. She whispered anyway, "Tell me how to do this, Dad." The wind howled back, no answer. She clenched the compass in her fist. The brass was cold, solid, real. Not a voice, not guidance, but something to hold. At dawn she stood. Her legs trembled from fatigue, but she forced strength into her voice. "We move. Now, we build stretchers for the injured. The storm will only get worse. If we stay, we die." The men stirred weakly, eyes heavy with doubt. Hale looked at her long and hard, then he nodded. "You heard her. Let's build." They cut poles from scrub pines, lashed them with belts and rope. They loaded the unconscious onto makeshift stretchers. Morgan distributed the packs, carrying more than her share. By mid-morning, they stepped into the storm. The wind hit like a wall, but Morgan pushed forward, breaking trail. Every step was agony. Her shoulders screamed under weight, lungs clawed for air. Behind her, the men staggered, half dragging, half carrying their brothers. She listened for signs, the crack of snow that might mean avalanche, the whisper of wind that meant open ground ahead, the rhythm of their steps, faltering, slowing, threatening collapse. Every time someone stumbled, she doubled back, dragged them up, forced them on. One more step, she urged. Then another. Hours blurred. The world shrank to white in breath and pain. At dusk, they found shelter in a rock hollow. The men collapsed, shivering, coughing, some too weak to speak. Morgan divided the last of the food. She ate nothing. Hale saw it. You need strength too. She shook her head. I'll eat when we're back. He studied her a moment, then said quietly, Your father would have been proud. The words pierced her chest. She turned away, blinking against tears the wind would have frozen anyway. That night, as the men slept fitfully, she sat awake again, compass in her palm, fire low. She thought of command, warm in their tents, writing these men off as lost. She thought of Harker, sneering at her instincts. She thought of her father, swallowed by storm. And she knew this was the moment that defined everything. Not training, not orders, not rules. Just one choice, to keep walking, to carry them, to refuse the silence that had taken so many before. At dawn she rose, we move again. And though they were broken, they followed, because sometimes leadership isn't given, it's taken. How far can you push a body before the soul refuses to quit? Morgan's legs felt carved from stone as she forced them up the ridge, snow battering her face, lungs screaming. Behind her, 6 men stumbled like shadows, 2 dragged on stretchers, 4 walking but barely, every step a fight against the mountain. The storm had worsened overnight, winds tearing like claws. Snow blinded, erased the horizon, turned the world into white nothing. Yet Morgan pressed on, head down, compass in her pocket, though she no longer looked at it. She didn't need it. Instinct carried her now. Hayes, Sergeant Hale's voice cracked behind her. She turned. He staggered, dragging one of the stretchers, face gray with exhaustion. We can't keep this pace. They'll die if we push harder. She walked back, crouched low, met his eyes. They'll die if we stop. He swallowed, jaw tight. Then he nodded and kept moving. Every hour another man collapsed. Every time Morgan pulled him up, forced food or water into him, gave him warmth from her own gear. She felt herself fatting, muscles trembling, vision blurring, body screaming for rest. But she carried more weight, bore more cold than any of them. Because she wasn't carrying just them. She was carrying her father, carrying the ghosts of his lost team, carrying the burden of every person who said she couldn't. By the second night, they were at the edge of collapse. Morgan built another shelter, shallow, crude, but enough to block the wind. She forced fire to life with shaking hands, flames barely catching. She handed out the last crumbs of food. She took none. Hale saw it again. You're killing yourself. She shook her head. I'm keeping you alive. He looked at her for a long moment, then whispered, Why? Morgan stared into the flames. Her voice was quiet, steady. Because the mountain already took my father. I won't let it take you too. Silence filled the cave. For the first time, the men saw her not as a stranger, not as a ghost, but as something else. Their anchor, their chance. At dawn, they moved again. The storm broke briefly, sky opening into pale sunlight. For the first time, Morgan saw the valley below, the faint outline of fob granite, distant but real. The sight drove a surge of strength through her chest. We're close, she called. Just hold on. The men stumbled forward, eyes fixed on her. Step by step, dragged by will more than muscle. Then it happened. The younger private, Malik, collapsed in the snow, eyes rolling back. His lips were blue, chest barely moving. Medic, Hale shouted, dropping to his side. Morgan knelt fast, pressed fingers to Malik's neck. A faint pulse, too faint. She stripped off her own jacket, wrapped it around him, pressed her body heat against his. She forced water past his lips, rubbed life into his arms, whispered fiercely, "Stay with me. Stay." Minutes dragged like hours. Then his chest rose deeper, his eyes fluttered. Alive. Morgan exhaled, head dropping briefly against the snow. Relief burned through her, but also fear. How many more collapses could she stop? They pushed again. The valley stretched long, endless, but closer with every painful step. Morgan's vision blurred at the edges. Her legs shook with every climb. Her breath rattled in her lungs. Then voices. Shouts carried on the wind. Figures appeared ahead, silhouettes in the snow. Soldiers from Fob Granite, weapons raised, scanning the ridge. Over here, Hale's hoarse voice cracked. "Help!" The figures broke into a run. Medics, guides, a dozen men swarming forward, lifting stretchers, wrapping blankets, pressing oxygen masks. Morgan staggered back, collapsing to her knees as the weight finally lifted. Her body trembled violently, exhaustion crashing over her like the avalanche she had outrun. The captain from the command tent shoved through the crowd, eyes wide as he saw the 6 men alive. "Impossible," he muttered. "They were gone. You—" He stopped when he saw her, mud-caked, eyes hollow but burning. Morgan didn't answer. She didn't need to. Hours later, the survivors lay in heated tents, medics working, IV lines dripping. Alive. Against every order, every expectation. Alive. Morgan sat outside alone, snow falling soft now, the storm finally broken. The compass lay in her palm, its needle trembling faintly. She thought of her father, of his last breath in the ice, of Morrison's warning, of Harker's doubt, of Rodriguez's faith, and of 6 men who would see another sunrise, because she refused to walk away. Footsteps approached. Hale lowered himself beside her, arm bandaged, face pale but steady. He studied her for a long time before speaking. "You saved us," he said simply. "Not the army, not command, you." Morgan looked at the snow. "I just didn't stop walking." Hale shook his head. "No, you carried us. When we had nothing left, you carried us." Silence stretched. Then he said quietly, "Your father would be proud." Morgan's throat tightened. For the first time in years, tears stung her eyes. She blinked them away, staring at the horizon. The mountains loomed, silent and eternal. They had taken so much, but not this time. She closed her hand around the compass, feeling its cold brass press into her skin. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand recognition. It simply acts. And in the silence of the Hindu Kush, Morgan Hayes had spoken louder than any order ever could.